Mike, I am struggling to figure out ideas of what to do in February. Do you know where I could find some tips or a guide or what I should be doing in this special month?
Yes, I do know, and as a fringe benefit, you'll get to see me, too, and I'll get to see you, because it's a live CityCast taping.
That's right. We are so excited to announce our first live taping of 2024 with a very special guest, Jade Womack. You might know her as Clock Out DC. She will be joining Mike and I at the Square Food Hall on Saturday, February 3rd.
But wait, where is the Square Food Hall?
It is downtown, 1850 K Street Northwest. And if you come at noon, you'll get to meet the team, enjoy exclusive food and drink specials from the Square chefs. Our taping begins at 1.
And wait, so what are some of the options of things we might learn about?
Well, Jade's going to be sharing all kinds of recommendations on how to live your best DC life this February. And she's pretty much the expert to all things DC, so she should know.
Well, for me, the main activity in February has now already been made clear, which is that I get to hang out with my co-host, Bridget Todd.
That's right. I'm so excited to see you. So Saturday, February 3rd at the Square. Come at noon to hang out with us. The taping begins at 1. You can find the RSVP link in the show notes.
Today on CityCast DC, the Washington Post's Emily Davies and CityCast contributor Dan Reed join me to talk about carjackings, to talk about whether DC should tear down Capital One Arena. And even though it's cold outside, we'll be talking about the newest calendar of outdoor concerts once it warms up. Today is Friday, February 2nd. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC is talking about. Dan and Emily, welcome.
Morning.
Thank you.
So, Emily, you covered a harrowing story this week. And, one of the things about the DC's sort of epidemic of carjackings is we sort of hear about it as statistics and as a thing we shake our heads over and say, this is really a dangerous thing. It's less frequent that we sort of get a TikTok of what happened. And you guys did amazing reporting on it. I'm a little bit surprised and crestfallen at how absent it's been from just sort of conversations I've had around town. But will you just walk us through what happened?
Yes, and thank you. It definitely is a really sad and really scary situation from every angle that you look at it. And families of people injured, families of people killed or the person killed, and a woman actually whose life was spared in this have all been willing to come forward and really share their stories, which is also unusual. So I think not only did we have this spate, but we also had victims really willing to share their stories, I think in part because they're so tired of this happening and don't want it to happen to somebody else. So the spate started around 5:45 Monday in downtown DC in an area where a lot of people work, some people live. It's known to be relatively safe. It was still light out.
Where was it precisely?
The 900 block of K Street near Mount Vernon Triangle. And a man named Mike Gill was on his way to pick up his wife from work. She's a lawyer and had texted her or called her saying, "Hey, I'm downstairs." And in the time it took for her to come down, a man who was later identified and actually killed by police jumped into his car and shot him.
So Mr. Gill is idling, waiting for his wife to come down from the building. And so I guess he's not literally driving or sitting in traffic, but he's pulled over, which I guess made him an easier car to jump into.
Right. That is what we know so far. The exact circumstances around how the suspect got into his car, how long he was waiting, all of that is part of a police investigation. But I did talk to a witness who was there when Mr. Gill's wife came out of her office building and saw her husband laying in a pool of his own blood. And so it was a really disturbing scene, to put it mildly, and he is sincerely fighting for his life right now.
So the assailant, we think, got him out of his car and shot him, or shot him and then got him out of his, one way or the other, he was gotten out of the car and then the car was gone.
It seemed like the assailant shot him inside of his car. And when his wife found him, it seemed like he was trying to get out. And so he was mostly on the ground, but his foot was still in his Jeep.
And what about the assailant? Where was he?
He was gone.
He took off on foot.
He took off on foot. And I believe it was at this scene that somebody who knew him went up to police and were like, hey, we know him, and helped maybe in some way try to figure out where he was going.
So we knew him, meaning the assailant or Mike Gill?
Yeah, the assailant. So that whole first scene was pretty messy. And I think it wasn't until a little later that police and people in DC realized that that was the start of this really terrible and deadly spate. About an hour and change later, 7-ish, he approached a woman, 26 years old, at her car and flashed his gun. She was popping the trunk, getting some stuff out of her car, and he demanded her keys in this sort of like eerily polite way in her telling. And she sort of froze in that moment, it seems, which is normal. Like nobody knows how they'll respond in a situation like that, and ran away and asked for help. And then he went very close by a few minutes later, and that one was near the Noma metro station. But carjackings are one of these crimes that don't really discriminate by location always. Shootings and homicides can be concentrated more in certain areas, but carjackings are spread throughout the city in a way that I think garners more attention, certainly. So he drives off in that car. And then, he goes on to commit more carjackings. At 10 p.m., there's another carjacking. At 11:10, there's another carjacking. And these now are moving into Maryland and Prince George's County. So he's crossed jurisdictions, which the only reason that matters is because the police, who are primarily responsible for handling the situation, that responsibility slightly shifts.
There's obviously a spate of carjackings. Carjackings are up in DC in general. At what point do authorities realize these are all connected? And this is not just for random ones. And then do they do anything different as a result of that?
This is still a part of the investigation, so I don't want to speak like I know their thought process, and I'm sure the situation was fluid, but somewhere early-ish in there, after the maybe second or third carjacking, I think there was some sort of awareness that it was maybe the same person. He kept changing cars. So that, I think, added an element of confusion and uncertainty to the situation. But from my understanding, there were certainly attempts to find the person who committed that original carjacking on K Street. But the situation is undeniably tragic and scary. And I think both speaks to a carjacking crisis in DC and doesn't, because as you said, the nature of this particular spate is different than what we're seeing in many, many other carjackings that we've been talking about over the last few years. So
is there some fix, legislative or other, I'm just thinking about the impact of this, some legislative tool, some policy that could be implemented or not implemented, where a big, shocking carjacking might tip the city towards a decision? Is there a consensus about what it would take to fix the carjacking crisis?
So last week, I was at a conference in DC led by a researcher at Chuck Wexler's organization, and it convened prosecutors and police chiefs and attorneys and a few community members from across the country to talk about carjackings. And I think it was titled something like "How to Understand and Prevent Carjackings," and it was this all-day affair. There was lunch, there was coffee. There was a whole schedule of different leaders from different cities trying to share what works and what doesn't work. And I have to say, it was fascinating. And I think people walked away with ideas, but there was not anything that jumped out as the fix. I think if people knew it, there would be a political will to get it done, given how scared DC residents are. But I think the answer is unclear, because there's also this tension between short-term fixes and long-term solutions, where, okay, there are some people who think we just need to have more stringent sentencing here or laws here or prosecution here that really takes up cases of carjackings and makes sure people are locked behind bars for a really, really long time. And then there are other people who fear that, okay, we do that, and now certain communities are even more hard hit by the effects of incarceration. People eventually will come back out and then do what? Because we don't have the best rehabilitation exactly in jails and prisons. So there's some consensus that let's get to the root cause, but that's hard and that takes a long time. So I don't know, and I don't think a lot of people know.
So what would you say is the takeaway for residents who understandably are already pretty anxious about the state of things in DC right now and might be even more concerned after what happened?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll just say what I try to tell myself because I don't think there's an easy way to ease that anxiety. I think trying to understand the issue as best as you can, understand the people behind the carjackings, understand the laws that are currently in place, and maybe learn how you feel about them. And if you feel like they should change, then speak up and, tell your representatives. I'm pretty careful when I get out of cars and when I get into cars, and, it's shame to feel like you can't pick someone up and just wait. But right now, I think I'd probably think twice about that. And that's not to say that's a foolproof way of preventing a carjacking, but in many cases that helps. And it also helps to immediately give up whatever the person is asking for, whether it's your car keys or something else. This carjacking spate is unusual in that the people seem to do that and were shot and in one case killed regardless. But in many instances that I've reported out in the last year, acquiescing, giving up what they ask for spares your life.
Speed into success. Learn French. Much like a high-speed train, Alliance Française's immersive French language classes propel you towards fluency. Unlock a world of personal and professional possibilities when you become a member and learn French at the renowned Alliance Française chapter in DC. Tradition and modernity intertwine, offering you an unparalleled learning experience that includes language classes, cultural events, and the only loan library in French language in the Mid-Atlantic region. Embrace the language that bridges cultures and enriches your resume. Enroll today. The spring session starts on February 19th. All ages and levels are welcome. After all, they are the French heartbeat of the nation's capital. Find them at www.francedc.org.
There's a new play at Gala Theater in Columbia Heights, and this one sounds really interesting. Cristina Garcia's gripping play, The Palacios Sisters, is a Latinx adaptation of Chekhov's Three Sisters, and it captures the vibrant chaos of 1985 Miami. Three sisters and their brother, who recently arrived from Havana, navigate Miami's treacherous landscape filled with drug wars and rampant violence. It's a story of challenged family bonds, resilience, and longing. Check out the world premiere in Spanish with English surtitles, also known as supertitles, at Gala Theater this month. The show is running through February 25th. For more information and tickets, visit galatheater.org. Once again, that's galatheater.org.
All right, so we need to move on to, sadly, a related topic, which is what's happening with downtown. This has been, since COVID, considered a great crisis, an Achilles heel of the city, a thing that might reverse years of the city's sort of general improvement, which is emptiness of downtown, offices leaving downtown, things closing up downtown. It sort of became acute or became a big issue when Ted Leonsis, the owner of the Wizards and Capitals, announced he wanted to move. The mayor, in a Business Journal story this week, says if they do go through with that, which she hopes they change their mind, but if they do, she don't want to just keep Capital One Arena around to have the Mystics games and the occasional concerts and B-list things. That arena was itself credited with the changing Chinatown radically. Dan, what is going to happen? You're a person who has studied urban planning, thinks about this, written about this quite a lot.
So, the mayor is putting together this task force that's supposed to come up with some recommendations by, I think, May for what should happen to the Capital One Arena site. And I imagine it'll be some mix of maybe housing and offices and shops, just sort of pumping up the kind of things that are already in Gallery Place and giving people more reasons to go there. if you ask me personally, I think the Wizards and the Caps need to stay where they are.
Right. So stipulated.
This is a lot of angst over a thing that, in my humble opinion, shouldn't be.
But look at one of the takeaways from that move. Part of the story of that was that the team, the owner, were pissed off about the state of Chinatown, about the sense that chaos, crime, smell of weed, loud buskers were keeping suburbanites from coming downtown, were making that not seem like a nice place to go. I don't know how much of that's exaggerated, et cetera. But insofar as DC is, we don't get people coming down just for the office anymore. And this is a big parcel. There's already some disagreement. Is any renovation going to screw over black businesses, or is it going to abet gentrification? It's a bit of a thorny problem, but a generation ago, it was all about building arenas and convention centers in downtowns. What's the next move?
So I think the next move for downtown DC, whether or not the arena stays, is figuring out how to make it a place where people don't just go to work, right? Even before COVID shut everything down, like a lot of people would go downtown and either just go home, or if they were going out, they would go out to a different neighborhood in DC, like to do Pond Circle or U Street or something for happy hour. And I think part of downtown's comeback has to be giving people reasons to hang out downtown, reasons to live downtown, making it feel like more of 24/7 neighborhood. And the irony of this is that this is something that a lot of suburban downtowns in Maryland and Virginia have already figured out. This is places like Bethesda or Arlington or Reston. Like, you can step out of your office and then go have a drink and then go do your grocery shopping and then go home, like all within a few blocks. And that's something you really can't do in a lot of downtown DC.
So speaking of the suburbs, our friend of CityCast, Junaid Deal from Axios, had I thought, very interesting column, basically saying Virginia's where the mojo is. The move of the basketball and hockey team is sort of a symbol of this, that they're going to be part of this dynamic new development that's going to have a little of everything, as you say. What do you make of that argument?
As a Marylander, I had first heart palpitations, like this is terrible. But then I had to stop and think about it. And Northern Virginia is a really big place. There are 3 million people living in Northern Virginia. If you picked it up and took it outside of the DC area, it is the size of Denver or San Diego. And so I think of this as less Virginia overtaking DC as where the action happens, so much as North Virginia developing its own action, right? It grew really fast and is kind of underserved for the kind of big regional destinations you would expect a region of 3 million people to have. Whether that means they should get an NBA team, but I think of things like Capital One Hall in Tyson's Corner, which is a big, indoor live music venue that Northern Virginia didn't really have before.
And it's weird. It's we're heading to a thing where regions' specialties are mashed out. That downtown DC, which was a land of federal workers with lanyards heading for the commuter transit at 5:30, needs to become a place where people actually live. And suburbs that had been bedroom communities need to become a place where people actually play. And there's a kind of race to do everything. Do you think DC is well positioned in that race, or not so well?
Yeah, I think DC, for a lot of the concern about downtown right now, is still really well positioned. It is literally still the middle of the region. It is where all 6 metro lines go. It is a huge tourist destination. It is the seat of the federal government. There are a lot of intrinsic, locational stuff in DC that's not going to move and will always give it an advantage that Maryland or Virginia won't have. The catch is how can you leverage those things a little bit differently than we have in the past?
There was in December, I thought a really interesting, cool post edit about what we can learn from Cleveland, which is their main industry collapsed a generation or two before ours. But downtown has grappled with the same problems and is, according to that piece, is kind of far ahead in the bringing people back downtown, turning office neighborhoods into places where there's people walking their dogs and getting groceries and living life.
Yeah, I wasn't sure what to make of that. The Post Editorial Board has done a bunch of these things over the past few months. They did one about Calgary has things to teach DC, and part of me is a little patronized by this.
Well, maybe part of you should get off your high horse because maybe we have some things to learn.
Fair. I think DC has a lot of stuff that Cleveland doesn't have already.
I'm told.
But I think the one thing that DC could learn from like a lot of the downtowns of other major American cities is like there is an urgency to doing stuff to fix downtown in other cities because downtown is often the only game, right? Like when it comes to big urban place where you can do things. And in the DC area, we have so many places competing to be that downtown sort of feels like an afterthought sometimes. And yeah, if that makes sense, right? Like we got to play like we only have one chance, and that chance is downtown DC.
So Emily, you work at the Post, which means you work downtown. You work in a office building opposite was what was once a kind of dodgy park that has been kind of redeveloped into a sort of festival space with like a concert band shell and so on. Does this feel like plausibly like a neighborhood, or is this just, a place at the end of the road to work and then you will take the road to someplace else when it comes time to blow off steam?
Yeah, it's an interesting question and one that I think about a lot, both as a DC resident and as a DC reporter. Franklin Park, which is the park you're referring to, is sort of like a great poster child in some ways for DC's quote unquote revitalization efforts. Because every so often you'll see a sort of unusual big poster sculpture thing with like themed fall or themed spring or themed Valentine's Day. And it's sort of a way of the city trying to encourage people to come downtown. Downtown can be fun. Do I think that's the fix? No. It's a little cheesy, but the park is nice and people who I work with use it and people in the area use it. So, there is both some successes in trying to get people to enjoy downtown and also some efforts that seem to me a little bit funny and cosmetic. There are not a lot of bars downtown, like, for example, that people, I think, go to get happy hour. There's been more than one time where I've left with coworkers and wondered where we should go. And, some of the few places around us are full. And so we wander
Nobody goes there. It's too crowded.
Yeah. So we wander up 14th Street and sort of head into another area. And I do think that somebody who was born and raised in DC downtown is it is really like a focal point, a centerpiece of how I think people who live here think of the city, even if they aren't often downtown. One point I'll make that I think is important. A lot of people blame crime for downtown DC and what's happening to it and why it's more empty and why there aren't as many businesses there. And I think some of that is fair and some of that is hiding behind the effects of the pandemic. Like some businesses just couldn't survive the pandemic and couldn't survive this halfway return to work in person. And so they're leaving. And I think some of them are like hiding behind violent crime. Whereas I live in DC, I work in DC, I cover crime, so I'm very aware of what's happening. And I still find DC to be a good place to live. And I think that is lost sometimes in talking about what's happening to the city. Downtown is critically important and how DC sees itself and how DC is seen. And I hope that the city figures it out. I really do.
There's a big difference between talking and reporting, especially right now with a fire hose worth of news coming your way. You know what helps? Having reporters in the field. I'm Brad Milkey from ABC News, and that's what we've got on ABC's daily podcast, Start Here. Every morning, Start Here takes you across the country and around the world for a quick, smart look at the stories that matter. It's fast, it's straightforward, and sometimes, gasp, news can even be fun. So let's meet up tomorrow morning. Listen to Start Here wherever you get your podcasts.
Shipping can make or break a sale, so optimize how you ship your orders with ShipStation. They make it easy to automate and manage orders no matter how big your business grows. And they might even be able to help reduce shipping and warehouse costs. So optimize and keep up your momentum for growth with ShipStation. Sign up for your free 60-day trial now at ShipStation.com and use the code POD. That's ShipStation.com with the code POD.
So let's talk not about downtown, about going out of town. Wolf Trap, longtime destination venue in Virginia, has a summer concert series every year. They released their calendar this week. Dan, what are you pumped about?
So I have to admit, I've never actually been to Wolf Trap, the river. It's such a big barrier. But looking at their calendar, I'm super stoked for Brittany Howard. And I see Snail Mail on there later in the summer. So that'll be fun.
I don't think I've been to Wolf Trap since I was a kid either, but it's like a great percentage of the acts performing are things that might have performed when I was a kid and not aimed at me, but aimed at like my parents. Like there's like the Beach Boys and like a Beatles tribute. And there's a bunch of interesting like opera and Robert Plant from Led Zeppelin and Alison Krauss. I, though, would really love to go see Wilco in June. And then the Out and About Festival, it's got Jenny Lewis also in June. So those are a couple of cool things.
Some of the stuff feels like the kind of things I'd expect to see at like Merriweather in Maryland, which I've been to many times.
Yeah, I think that the degrees of cultural difference between the two are pretty limited.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we can make it a road trip.
Yeah.
We'll post the full Wolf Trap summer lineup in our show notes. And if you like live performances, come to our taping tomorrow. It's at the Square Food Hall in Farragut, right on top of the Orange Line, just a short walk from the Red Line. Clock Out DC will be there. So will Bridget, and so will I. And you'll get to meet the whole CityCast team. If you come, it starts at noon. Be there. Emily, Dan, thank you guys for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. This was great.
That is all for today here on CityCast DC. Our senior executive producer is Priyanka Tilve. Our senior producer is Julia Karen. Our newsletter editor is Kayla Cote-Stemmerman. Our production assistant is Ash Durbin. And our hosts are Bridget Todd and me, Michael Schaefer from Politico. Music is by Alex Roldan. If you enjoyed the show, come tell us about it tomorrow at our live taping. We'll be back Monday morning with more news from around the city. Bye.